Okay, guys. So if you're listening to this, watching this, chances are we're not in school due to snow. So I'm hoping you guys are staying safe and warm. Um, so today we're going to talk about adolescence. So this is kind of like that awkward time. I'm sure everyone's experienced this time in your life. Um, Sometimes it's considered a stormy period for all adolescents, but not necessarily all of them. This time period technically begins at puberty, could be as early as 10 for some girls, and between childhood to the adulthood phase. It's marked by different rites of passage, such as bar or bat mitzvahs, confirmation, etc. It's hard to define actually when it ends. It's an age where we can work, drive, vote, drink, join the military, become economically independent, as well as entry to adulthood can also vary from person to person. One sec. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go on to the next slide. So some general concepts. There's a lot of physical changes when it comes to adolescence. There's a great variation between early and late adolescence in regards to development and occupational engagement. Adolescence starts with clear, visible physical, psychological, and even cognitive changes. However, as mentioned before, there's no clear end. We're also looking at more qualitative and individual differences that mark adulthood. So think of early adolescence as around the age of 13 to 15 and late adolescence around the age of 16 to 18. There's two key things between both younger and older adolescents, and those two things are driver's license that increases the independence as well as their ability to work. Once again, it's harder to define the end of adolescence. Is it when we move out on our own? Is it when we start supporting ourselves, etc.? So some social changes or the independence, so the driving and working, different responsibilities such as voting, signing contracts and financial agreements, as well as cognition, so developing that development of abstract thinking in general. So then we have cultural occupations, roles, and adolescence. So sometimes they're culturally defined, so depending on the culture that you're raised up in. Some are necessary. So, for example, like if you're a son, you're born the son. If you have siblings, you are in fact a sibling. Others are more chosen, it's kind of like musician, athlete, artist, etc. So these are the kind of like those hobbies that we start developing, but they can overlap. So a dad can also be considered a caregiver, as well as they can also conflict. So a spouse, an OTA student, and a parent. Why might you think that that can conflict? So having various responsibilities can cause time crunches, like when to wear your so to speak your OTA student hat, as well as when to wear your spouse hat, as well as when to wear your parent hat. It's kind of like a big juggling act that a lot of adults will or adolescents will go through. Um, so patterns of behavior that individuals actively identify with and offer guidance about expected behaviors and responsibilities in specific defined situations. So being able to put a particular hat on, so to speak, or anything like that, depending on the situation provided. Then we have brain maturation, which is that prefrontal cortex matures. Any ideas of what age that matures at? So when we think prefrontal cortex, think of like that front brain, that frontal lobe. So the prefrontal cortex will mature around 25 years of age. This has high neural connectivity and connections with the limbic system and the striatal system. So your limbic system is in charge of emotions, your stress, your cortisol levels, and formation of memories. Your striatal system is in the cerebral cortex, part of the basal ganglia. It influences planning and moderation of movement. It supports executive functioning and is activated by stimuli associated with reward and novel or intense stimuli. It's associated with risk taking. Highlighted part of the image is the striatal system. So this pink imagery is the striatal system. So then we have risk taking. So this is associated with our striatal system. Our striatal system is related to impulse control and judgment, which has a lot to do with risk taking because you're can be impulsive in taking risk, as well as judging the allotted risk that you believe the activity will take. So remember, in adolescence, this is the healthiest time of our life. Young people make choices that damage their health. So any ideas of what that could look like? So choices that damage our health can be considered motor vehicle accidents, any sort of substance abuse, high risk physical activities, not wearing a helmet when you're skiing, or wearing a helmet in general, driving while intoxicated, or texting while driving. Then we have temporal discounting, which is kind of that idea of like disregard for long-term impact, focusing on short-term rewards. So kind of looking at that invincibility fallacy. So kind of like when you hear a teenager like, "Oh, I can do that," like whatever. I can go jump that cliff and land perfectly fine. But what if you actually land awkwardly? Could cause a concussion, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, etc. They don't quite calculate all the risks. They just calculate the risk that they're willing to go over. Then we have puberty. So you have your secondary sex characteristics of puberty, and your reproductive system reaches maturity. It's the second most rapid period of development. Can anyone tell me what the first rapid period of development is? So it's infancy. Girls enter puberty approximately 1.5 to 2 years earlier than boys. And this depends on the gonadotropic hormones, which is influenced by heredity and environment, which is physical and chemical, as well as influenced by height, weight, and sexual maturity. The gonadotropic hormones regulate estrogen and testosterone that release and is important to puberty in general. Then we have physical maturity does not equate to emotional and cognitive maturity. If physically more mature, people may treat them like adults, even though emotionally and cognitive development has not sped up. This may make it an even larger disparity between physical and mental development. Again, girls that enter puberty early are at a greater risk for anxiety and depression. There's all kinds of environmental factors that can attribute to this. So you have nutrition, attitude, and chemicals, or altitude, sorry, not attitude. So nutrition, obesity may affect onset, or not enough proper nutrition may delay onset. Altitude, believe it or not, shows an onset and prolongs the release. And then chemicals in hair products and toys can also affect that as well. Then we have kind of this diagram that's showing the drinking water and modes of hormones entering the H2O supply. So if you look at everything, anything from like homes to industries, livestock, agriculture, even landfills and trash can get into our wastewater treatment centers, as well as our surface water and groundwater, and then eventually lead to our drinking water. Kind of scary, right? Then we have physical changes. So characteristics are height, weight, and sexual maturity. So in boys, peak growth velocities around 13 and a half years of age versus girls, peak growth velocity is 11 and a half years of age. So an example of this, I think I've told you guys before, but I have a twin sister. So when we were both 13, she was standing like at least 6 to 7 inches taller than me. I was about 4'8" going into high school, and then by the end of high school, early 20s, I grew to about 5'10" to where I am now, and my sister stayed at her 5'5", 5'6" stature. The weight, also the same thing as height, but influenced more by the environment. So think of like diet and exercise and nutrition. Then you have sexual maturity, which ejaculation of the first mature sperm happens in mid-adolescence versus menarche, which is the average for American girls is around 12 years of age. Some more additional stats is that boys peak at high velocity is greater and last longer. Boys typically reach 95% of adult stature by 18 and the rest by 20 years of age, and 95% of the research of girls reach 95% of adult stature by 16 and a half and rest by age 18. It's also noted that children are heavier now compared to 10 years ago due to diet and sedentary lifestyle. Then we have physical maturity, which we have the epiphyseal plate, also known as the growth plate. They're more vulnerable during adolescence. It's ossified at its end stage, and boys' plates stay open longer than girls' plates, which would explain why the female's growth is significantly more and stops at an earlier time period, and why the men's or the boy's growth happens and shuts down at a later time frame. Then we have more physical maturity. So BMI is used to assess weight. BMI can be influenced by hormonal hormones. The two major hormones are testosterone and estrogen. So for hormonal influence, as males go through adolescence, their proportion of body fat decreases, whereas for girls it increases. It's affected by activity level. And then you have your testosterone helps you become leaner, and estrogen increases the amount of body fat. Why do you think this is necessary for females? Any ideas? So this is going to come into play when we're dealing with pregnancy. It's to help with the pregnancy. Then we have gender differences. So muscle fiber differences results in strength differences. So females tend to have about 27 to 35% more type 1 muscle fibers than men, which are the slow twitch muscle fibers. Aerobic muscles rich in blood carrying myoglobin deliver more oxygen to the muscles, so greater endurance but less strength. And then we have 25 to 29.9 as far as the BMI scale is constituted as overweight. Then we have less than 30, which is constituted as obese. Obesity greatly increases the impact of other health conditions. So overweight, and as of 2019, the 16% of high schoolers are classified as overweight. And also in 2019, about 15% of high schoolers are quantified as obese. Then we have the different health conditions which can limit participation in occupations needed to support healthier lifestyle decisions for adolescents. Then we have assessing sexual maturity, which typical tool is the sex maturity rating scale. There's stages referred to as the Tanner stages, which Tanner is the developer of this scale, and it's numbered 1 through 5, each describing stages from pre-adolescence. So it's a method of visual inspection of the genitalia or breast and pubic hair. At stage 1, there's no sex characteristics, so none of those. And then all the way to adulthood, which is stage 5, mature sex characteristics. If time is delayed or expedited, there's more. It could be that there's more stress, poor body image, and depression, as well as substance abuse. This particularly will go for girls that undergo puberty super early. Then we have motor performance skills. This is a time of refinement for motor skills. So gross fine motor skills are matured or close to by adolescence. Motor skills that underlie the ability to physically perform tasks. So fine motor intact for detailed drawing and manipulation, precise calibration to use the brake, accelerator, and clutch simultaneously to drive, as well as the flow of being able to eat normally, drink, and then also play the guitar. So being able to separate those exact skills. So then you have your measurements. So childhood is the milestones and skill acquisition, and adolescence is quantitative. So speed, precision, power, endurance, and reaction time. Gross motor and fine motor skills mature. It's necessary that for adjustments for new tasks that are quickly learned. So we have physical changes in adolescence with strength. So trunk strength increases steadily in males and increases less extreme for females. Grip strength, there's a greater increase in males, but both male and female show significant gains either way. Then you have sports and overuse injuries in adolescence. So prior injury heavily correlated with subsequent injury. So if you have a previous injury, the likelihood of you suffering another injury to that same exact area significantly increases. And there's screenings that can be helpful to determine the risk as well. So we're seeing more of these programs for this in physical therapy. So this is why a lot of people encourage kids to play multiple sports rather than just one. So you're working on more muscles and there's a less likelihood of injury or burnout. Then you have chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which you've probably heard it referred to CTE. It's a degenerative brain disease. Below is a link that will kind of explain what that looks like and what we're looking at as far as CTE. So I'll take a second to take a look at that. So CTE is common with athletes, military personnel, and others with history of repetitive brain injuries. You'll see a lot of this with football, a lot of concussions. So successive concussions can cause CTE. It's actually the protein tau that clumps up and spreads through the brain and kills brain cells. CTE is seen in individuals as young as 17 years old. As far as early symptoms, they usually appear in your late 20s or early 30s. And that the symptoms are the mood's affected. So your impulse control, paranoia, aggression, and depression increase. And then your disease progression and symptoms. So in your 40s and 50s, your cognition, your thinking, your memory, judgment, and confusion can also lead to dementia. Right here, we have two pictures. We have a picture of the normal brain and a picture of an advanced CTE brain. So note the huge spaces in the central ventricles on advanced CTE and the huge corpus callosum. The thalamus almost depleted, so this where the sensory relay station is. All sensory information goes here first before being relayed to the cerebral cortex. Also, the sleep, wakefulness, and consciousness, learning, and memory. Overall shrinkage and loss of the white matter, so that the area where they send signals between the brain and spinal cord and body, and the gray matter, where we receive and regulate information. Then we have hypothalamic amenorrhea. So this happens a lot in females. It's a lack of estrogen production. So lack of bone mass building, which peaks around age 30. The lack of bone mass built is also known as osteoporosis. So this is another video that you guys can watch. I'll give you guys a second to watch that. So then you have the athlete's amenorrhea, which can also be seen in women with eating disorders, as well as poor nutrition and certain hormonal changes as well. So different sect of that. Next, we're going to talk about sleep changes in adolescence. So in regards to sleep, we have our circadian rhythm, which is a built-in schedule that determines our sleep and wake cycle. And this can change in puberty. So bedtime is often approximately around midnight or later. Therefore, teens are not naturally awake at 7 or 8 a.m. There's been talk about starting high school later in the mornings due to this and our better understanding of like this. Also, the fact that we don't need to force students to get up to learn the adult work time patterns, an 8 to 5 schedule, as their circadian rhythm will change over time to that as an adult, and not quite in their adolescence. So there's been talks about that. So instead of starting at like 7:30, 8 o'clock, maybe doing it like a 9 to 10 start, and just going on later in the day. So what's this impact on occupational performance? So it's lack of sleep or sleep deprivation is associated with mood disorders, increase in obesity, impaired higher level cognitive functioning, motor vehicle accidents due to tiredness, substance abuse, and the list goes on and on. So there's habits, environmental factors, and practices that influence sleep and length and quality. So how can we as OTPs work on this in the clinic? So we often teach this for clients with any sleep disturbances. So below we'll have them do a sleep diary, visual imagery, using a sound machine, or any lifestyle choices. So a lifestyle choice could be suggesting like lack of blue light, so not using a lot of screens before bedtime, maybe giving an hour to 30-minute time period where there's no screens, encouraging that reading or doing something creative before bedtime and stuff like that. And then we don't want to just give resources to the families or to the kids or to the adolescents. We want to like walk them through it. And we also don't want to completely change their routine. We would just want to have adapt their routine to what we can do to help and assist with their sleeping patterns. So I know it says in pairs, but since we're home and it's been snowing, I want you guys to individually complete an occupational profile. You could do it on yourself. You can do it on a partner. You can do it on anyone that you live with, a roommate. And based on an occupational profile interview, you can use the AOTA's fact sheet of OT's role in sleep, which can be found on Blackboard to design a sleep hygiene schedule with your client. I want you to educate your client on the importance of sleep and the impact of sleep deprivation on the occupational engagement performance. You can use your textbook on page 309 as well as table 14.1 for sleep hygiene strategies. I'll give you guys a second or a second. I'll give you guys time to do that. Feel free to pause and catch back up in a second. Okay, so we have changes in specific mental functions. So we have the improvement of semantic memory. So remember, semantic memory is a type of long-term memory involving the capacity to recall words, concepts, or numbers, which is essential for the use of understanding of language. Then we have improvement in reasoning and metacognition. So reasoning and metacognition are working memory and impulse control, and reasoning becomes more complex. Then we have increased challenge to judgment. So judgment can be developed by challenging it in academics, challenge to think about additional topics. Then we have the increase in risk-taking behaviors, which remember we talked about the striatal system, becomes reward-driven before prefrontal cortex's judgment. So this influences planning and moderation of movement, supports executive functioning, active but by stimuli associated with reward and novel or intense stimuli, and it's also associated with the above risk-taking. So when stressed, we fall back on automatic emotionally driven actions and associated errors of judgment and risk. So just so you know that when we are stressed, we do not make decisions when we're not emotional. So with these types of kids, we want to be very mindful of their stress and where they're at before they make rash decisions. Then we have media use. So heavy TV use has been associated with poor school performance. Moderate internet usage does not interfere, and social media can be helpful or a hindrance. However, this is all very biased research. As TV's been around longer, so more studies on it have been utilized. So it's more research based on anti-TV versus like non. Then we have social development. So we have cognitive development allows for an increased awareness of the situation, an increased awareness of the emotions and complexity. Then we have contradictory, which is experiencing two conflicting emotions at once. So I'm going to pause and let you watch this video and we can discuss that. So in this video, it's the skaters. So we're going to focus on the Russian skater and the contradictory emotion after winning and getting second, the Japanese skater not showing sobbing after winning, etc. What mental functions play a role in this, you think? Metacognition, and your ability to be able to consider other people's views. So then we have peer groups. So we have friends. So friends become extremely important and benefit the other friend. We have acquaintances. Acquaintances are share occasional pleasantries. So this might be someone that you bump into the hallway occasionally, but you don't really know who they are. Companions, which are interact regularly and share the same interests. Then we have intimates. So intimates are close bonds, opinions that they respect. They support highly valued. Adolescents with more intimate friendships are more likely to be described as better adjusted and more socially competent. Then we have romantic relationships, which are a product of caregiving, attachment, and reproductive needs, and they serve to develop skills in marriage. We have cliques, which are that need for belonging and validation, similar in social class, race, age. And then we have some identity crises. So this is kind of where you're trying to, like in high school or like middle school, you're trying to figure out what crowd you fit in with. Maybe you're into art, but also play sports and kind of navigating those social dynamics. So remember in Erickson's theory, we have the identity versus identity confusion during adolescence. So the task or purpose is peer relationships, separation from parents, trying new roles, integrating previous resolutions. Then we have adverse resolution is unable to identify roles, establish identity and awareness. And the idea of the identity crisis is that temporary distress as experiment with alternatives before settling on values and goals. So being able to test the waters of where you are. We have Kohlberg stages of moral development. Anyone remember what this is? It's back. So remember, Kohlberg stages are 1 through 6, with 1 being rules are obeyed to avoid punishment. 2 is rules obeyed to gain personal benefit. 3, obey rules to respect others. 4 is obeying rules to conform to society's rules. 5 is social contract or generally agreed upon rights. 6 is adherence to rules of concise and self-chosen ethical principles. Parents, so for example, parents who discuss moral concerns, ask clarifying questions, present higher level reasoning, have more moral development, versus parents that lecture, use threats, or use sarcastic remarks show little to no change. This can be involved with the parenting practices. More schooling, you go through higher stages. Peer interaction influences quite a bit. And then culturally, remember, industrialized nations move through stages quicker versus small villages might only get to stage 3. Why might that be? So think of an isolated village, they're more concerned with the close connection of individuals and the group than they are with anything else. So then we have issues during adolescence. So a lot of issues pop up during adolescence. This can include violence and bullying, various eating disorders, a decline in self-esteem, as well as suicide. Um, those least satisfied with their appearance tend to have low self-esteem, and it's also been shown that girls have lower self-esteem than boys. So we have suicide in adolescence. It's the second leading cause of death for children, adolescents, and young adults aged 15 to 24. Depression is a factor. So depression, the majority of children and adolescents who attempted suicide have a significant mental health disorder, which is usually depression-based. Among younger children, suicide attempts are often impulsive, so they may be associated with feelings of sadness, confusion, anger, or problems with attention and hyperactivity. Among teenagers, suicide attempts may be associated with feelings of stress, self doubt, pressure to succeed, financial uncertainty, disappointment, and loss. So, with teenagers, for some teams, suicide may appear to be the only solution to their problem. So, some risk factors and some possible warning signs for persons that are suicidal. Risk factors are family history of depression or suicide, psychiatric disorders or comorbidities, abuse and exposure to violence, impulsivity, access to firearms, bullying, feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, or social isolation, as well as acute loss or rejection. Some warning signs can be changes in eating or sleeping habits, frequent or pervasive sadness, withdrawal from friends, family, and regular activities, frequent complaints about physical symptoms, often related to emotions, such as stomach aches, headaches, and fatigue, decline in the quality of schoolwork, preoccupation with death and dying, as well as giving items away and planning. So, some suicide facts and figures in Colorado. It's the seventh leading cause of death, second leading cause of death of age 15 to 44. Approximately 1,302 deaths by suicide in 2020, 21.5 per 100,000 deaths by suicide in 2020. It's the sixth highest proportional rate in the country. 8 times as many people died by suicide in 2019 than alcohol-related motor vehicle accidents. 68.6% of communities did not have enough mental health providers to serve residents in 2020, according to federal guidelines. Colorado is currently the 43rd in funding for access to mental health resources, which is a much higher prevalence though for mental health issues. So we have work, which is regulated by the Fair Labor Standards Act and state law, whichever is more protective. 70% of teens work. So you have FLSA, 14-year-old minimum age limits the number of hours worked for those under 16. So you should have 3 hours on a school day or 18 hours a week, or 8 hours on non-school days or 40 hours in non-school weeks between the ages or hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. In summer, teens can actually work until 9 p.m. That's June 1st through Labor Day. 16 plus have the same work schedule as some adults, or same as adults, except for students. And then 17 plus is whatever hours, but not jobs deemed dangerous. So 17 and up can work whatever hours, but not jobs deemed dangerous by the Secretary of Labor. How teens spend time will have an impact. So 40% of non-workday is free time. How they fill this time impacts health and development. So unhealthy ways to fill the time could be vandalism, drugs, etc. And then they have social group participation contributes to self-definition and occupational identity. Participation in structured extracurricular activities, less likely to engage in antisocial behavior, higher level academic achievement, more likely to have positive psychosocial function, as well as looking at access to occupation is important. So school, work, and leisure. So can they access the golf course? Can they go camping? Can they have access to a swimming pool? What do their friends have access to? And that is the end. Like I said, um, if this is posted, chances are we're enjoying a snow day. So I hope you guys stay safe and warm. I really want you guys to finish this PowerPoint. And then on Tuesday when we meet back, what I'll do is put together a Kahoot for us to review, as well as compiling some questions that you guys have while you guys went over the lecture. Once again, if you guys have any questions or anything that you need from me, please don't hesitate to reach out. I hope you guys stay safe and have a great weekend. And I'll see you guys on Monday.